It is 6:05, and I'd like to call to order the Housing Authority. If I could get a roll call, please.
Natalie Call, present.
Laura Schifrin, via Zoom.
I know, sorry, I'm looking at the screen. Laura Schifrin, I got her.
Chad Sexton Duranian.
And Courtney Bradley, present.
And I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Townsend Housing Authority. So Dave, now it's you.
Dave Worland, Townsend Affordable Housing Authority.
Trust. Did I say authority?
Beverly made
You
you
did.
present.
Veronica Cal present, Cindy Boundy present. All right, so we are ready to roll. Are there any additions or deletions for people from the crowd?
Nope, I don't think we have anything if anybody does.
All right. So we're gonna roll right into the discussion with Town Council, Adam Costa. Adam, is there anyone else here that you don't know?
I don't think so. We've either met all of you individually or I've seen you, or so no. But if I haven't, nice to meet you all.
All right,
In person.
thank you. So we just wanted to meet so that both of our groups would meet, and also for you to discuss the roles of the Housing Authority and the Housing Trust. So
Yeah, that's great.
Hand it over to you.
Okay, yeah, so we had an opportunity, me and the Affordable Housing Trust, to meet, what was it at this point, 6 weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, something like that. And we met for probably an hour or so, and we spent most of our time reviewing this document, which is a document that was issued. This version is version 3, 2018. So the Massachusetts Housing Partnership created this guidebook for municipal affordable housing trusts. I think the first iteration of it was in 2008 or 2009, and they've issued now 3 versions of it, this one being the latest version. And it's not, it's not the Bible per se, but it's a plain English explanation of the municipal affordable housing trust statute, what that statute allows for, all the legalities of how affordable housing trusts work and function. But then also a substantial portion of it is dedicated to just the practicalities of, what do these affordable housing trusts do? What's their relationship with other municipal agencies, including housing authorities? And how have they functioned? There's a whole section of this trust document it's chapter 6, community examples and best practices, that is exactly that. It's examples of how these affordable housing trusts have operated in other communities. And it's not a one size fits all. I represent some communities with affordable housing trusts that are incredibly active. I represent some communities that have had them in existence for some time, yet they're not all that active. And then I represent a few communities that have recently adopted them, and they're just sort of ramping up and hoping to do big things, great things, but just haven't quite gotten there yet because they're relatively new. So we spent a lot of time in our meeting a few weeks ago talking about this document, but then we recognized, which we sort of knew in advance, that one of the key questions was going to be, how can the Affordable Housing Trust coexist with the Housing Authority, and how can they feed off of one another and assist one another without at the same time stepping on each other's toes? And I'm seeing this for the first time. I just gave it a glance, this role of the Affordable Housing Trust and PHA.
That was something that we wrote up after your meeting, the meeting we had with you, and then Karen with the 5-year plan, we met with her and looked at this. But it's not by any means a finished document or anything like that.
Well, I just gave it a quick review, and I like it because it is a nice summary and has references. I presume these page references are to this document here, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it has nice references for these various topics, the vision of the Affordable Housing Trust, how staff assists, model trust, obviously that's in existence already. For the members of the Affordable Housing Trust, I will update you, we do have a draft bylaw prepared. I got a draft of it earlier today because that was a request that you had made for a bylaw for the upcoming town meeting, since one was never adopted. So I've been working with my colleague Ben Taylor to prepare that, and you'll have it probably tomorrow.
Oh, good, because we have a meeting on Monday afternoon.
I know you do. That was on my calendar. That was the deadline. So I got a draft of it today from Ben that I had reviewed previously. He made some edits to it. He sent it back to me earlier today. I didn't get to it by the end of the day, but I will get it out tomorrow in draft form for you to review and to consider at your upcoming meeting. But obviously the declaration of trust itself has been recorded at the Registry of Deeds, so the trust does exist and was adopted by a town meeting.
And we will have the folder for with all the amendments signed and the, resignation and appointment. I'll have that for you on Tuesday when you're here for office.
That's great, and I can record that. Excellent. And so back to this document, talks about an action plan and gaining support in the community and how to engage the public. So this is all great. Talks a bit about municipal staff, and we'll touch upon this maybe today because these were two topics: the housing coordinator, housing administrator, how that would all work. But I like this intersection. What do they call these? Venn diagrams. So I like this because although I'm going to tinker with it a bit, I think that it's generally correct that there are certainly separate responsibilities that Affordable Housing Trust has from a housing authority, and I work in other communities that have both. Affordable housing trusts are initially they're created as funds with a trust that oversees the expenditure of those funds. They don't generally own properties or manage properties. You have in many communities housing authority properties that are low income or moderate income properties that are managed by the housing authority. I don't know any trust that does that. I'm not saying there aren't any, but that's not generally a function that's performed by an affordable housing trust. What the trust does do is it utilizes funds to provide incentives, sometimes sponsoring grant programs, sometimes assisting with down payments, sometimes preserving, and this is where I think that there is something in the THA responsibilities column that can really be in both, and that is preserving the affordability of units in Townsend. I have some affordable housing trusts that have done exactly that. I shared with the trust in our meeting a few weeks ago that my firm has represented the town of Ashland for about, 12, 14 years now. And they adopted an affordable housing trust not long after we became town council. And their trust has been very active over the years, over the past decade plus, in preserving the affordability of several affordable units in various 40B projects within the town. Specifically, a number of 40B projects that were developed in the 90s and early 2000s that utilized the old version of the deed rider. And for those of you that don't know, the old version of the deed rider didn't necessarily survive foreclosure. The new version does, and the new version has lengthy processes and procedures that need to be followed by homeowners in ownership projects and owners and managers and rental projects to attempt to preserve the affordability in the event that a property is going to be foreclosed upon, providing notice to the town, yielding rights to the town. The older deed riders didn't have as robust of rights for towns. And so the Ashland Affordable Housing Trust has stepped in a number of instances, more than a dozen times over the past dozen years or so, where units were going to be foreclosed upon because property owners couldn't pay their mortgages, couldn't locate an eligible purchaser for these units. They only have an obligation to attempt to do so, I think, for 3 months. So the Affordable Housing Trust has stepped in, has acquired these units utilizing funds they have available. In many cases, these projects are now, units are now 20 to 30 years old and they need some updates. I spent some money to update the units, not significant expenditure of funds, but $5,000 or $10,000 new coat of paint, things of that sort. Fixing repairs and countertops or whatever it might be, and then has flipped those units, availing itself of the fact that a municipality can hold the unit for as long as a year while attempting to locate an eligible purchaser, or longer with DHCD approval. So the Affordable Housing Trust has managed to maintain the affordability of these units, and also when it re-records a deed rider on the unit, when it flips the unit, the new deed rider is a new deed rider, and so it provides those additional protections to the community. And therefore these units haven't fallen off of the affordable housing, the subsidized housing inventory for the town, which of course is the end all be all for many communities in attempting to minimally meet your 10% objective to regain some power when it comes to things like unfriendly 40Bs. So that's just one example. That Ashland example is not in this document, but I believe there was another reference here to preservation of affordability, but you can see here if you look at the document, there's all sorts of examples. So Eastham has a rental assistance program that is sponsored by the Affordable Housing Trust. Leverett has a buy down program that operates in a similar way. City of Newburyport, I have some familiarity with this because my office is in Newburyport and we do a fair amount of work in the city. They have managed to do some preservation, and also they offer down payment assistance as well. Norwell has been more proactive in attempting to redevelop municipally owned properties. which is something that can be done by an affordable housing trust, often in conjunction with the housing authority.
So, an affordable housing trust can provide down payment assistance.
Sure. No, it's okay. So those are just some examples. Again, I'm not going to walk through all the examples because you can read the document for yourself. But I think really the objective of trying to meet again 6 weeks later, but also with the housing authority present, is to just sort of generally talk about ways that the two bodies can work together. I mentioned before, without stepping on each other's toes. I don't know that there's a significant risk of that. I mean, it's not really a circumstance where I think the Affordable Housing Trust and the Housing Authority are going to be like this. They may have tasks that they're performing on their own, independent of one another, and they may have other tasks that they can collaborate on to try and increase either the stock of affordable housing, or the affordability of that housing in the community, or the redevelopment of municipal property. We spent, I wouldn't say a fair amount of time, we spent 15 minutes, I think, last time in our meeting talking about some parcels that might be available for potential redevelopment. So that's an example of something that the trust can potentially pursue, utilizing whatever funds it has available to it, whether it be for feasibility studies or for engineering or for further investigation, RFP processes, whatever. But the housing authority may be able to provide a function there as well, assisting with some of those same tasks or doing more. I mean, again, it may be a circumstance where the housing authority could develop one of these properties if it had the resources available. I have no sense. I've not worked extensively with your housing authority, so I have no sense as to what resources are available to the housing authority versus the trust. We talked a little bit about, number one, the fact that the trust is starting really without, you don't have a pot of money that you've been gifted, but you do have some property that in your possession, and you have the ARPA funds as well. But that's really the only source of funding. It's not as if, one way that affordable housing trusts have been funded in some of our communities is when units have fallen off the inventory, there is a requirement, even in the old deed rider, that the difference between the affordable housing sales price, the market rate price, that deficit will be then refunded to the town. And if you have an affordable housing trust, it can be directed directly into your trust, and those funds can be used on other projects. Not necessarily a good thing that units are falling off your inventory, but at least it's sort of like a consolation prize that at least you get some funding in your account.
So right now, if that were to happen, and those monies came into the town, where would they go? I mean, sure, we have an affordable housing trust, but I don't see where there's anything that says direct these funds here, that they would just fall right into the general fund.
That's correct.
So historically, they have gone into the general fund. And there have been funding for the housing authority, for instance, a $10,000 seed money has gone into the general fund and was spent by the town that way.
So how does one make sure that those funds get directed where they're supposed to, whether it's the housing authority or the housing trust? How do we do that?
Sure. So I think it depends upon the language of the specific deed rider, but the more recent deed riders are specific in stating that the funding has to be used for the purposes of affordable housing in some way related to that. So I think that purpose clause is enough to direct it directly into the Affordable Housing Trust. I have other communities that routinely make the appropriation at the annual town meeting to appropriate the receipt of those funds into the Affordable Housing Trust. So that's the way to be certain that you have it on the books that town meeting voted for that to occur.
So that it's essentially free cash at that point.
That's how it's been done.
Right.
But of course, you had no Affordable Housing Trust, right? So it's been spent in that way because there was really nowhere else for it to go.
Yeah. Well, the housing authority was never made aware that those funds were coming in the town. It was just put in there and then we had no idea.
Right.
So when we started researching, I want to say back in 2015, that's when we realized that any monies that came in for any housing issue went directly into the general fund and was spent at the end of the year without us knowing about it.
Got it.
So if you have a new deed rider and it says, oh, the funds have to be spent for affordable housing, does that still require an annual town meeting vote? Or can you just kind of slide them where they go when it comes in?
So I think in most municipalities in which I work, they just get directed into the trust.
And
So
that's,
our
they should,
treasurer needs to be aware, and the treasurer is the one who manages the funds
yes.
for the housing trust.
Correct.
Not the accountants. Okay.
I think I gave another example, just happens to be from the town of Ashland as well, where the Affordable Housing Trust had gained title to a parcel of property. It's a bit of a sob story because there was litigation, the butters got upset. Ultimately, it was successful in the sense that the project got built. But the Affordable Housing Trust had control over property. They put an RFP out to try and find and partner with a developer who could create an affordable housing project, and not just the traditional Chapter 40B affordable housing project where it's only 25% of the units that are deemed affordable and they're affordable to individuals making 70–80% of area median income, but a true affordable project with lower percentage income individuals qualifying, 100% affordable, developed utilizing low income housing tax credits. And they were successful through that RFP process in identifying they had multiple respondents to the RFP, and they selected EA Fish and the Planning Office for Urban Development, which is the sort of the development arm of the Archdiocese. Those two entities partnered together and made a submittal, and they chose that to be created entity to be the developer of this affordable housing project, and ultimately it did get built on the site. It was a 100% affordable, 100% age restricted project for the community, and it didn't get built in full. They got permission for 2 buildings. I think it was a total of about 100 units, and they built only one of the buildings, I think 62 units in total. So it had to go through about 3 rounds of low-income housing tax credit applications with the HCD. It took about 3 years, 1 round per year. So it's a slow process. Nothing happens overnight. As I mentioned, there was litigation because the new developer had to seek modifications of the permits and approvals that the Affordable Housing Trust had pre-permitted the site. So they had gone to the Zoning Board of Appeals and obtained a Chapter 40B comprehensive permit relatively easily from their own town, right? But then when the developer went back, it had been a few years by the time the RFP process unfolded and the deal was negotiated and the purchase and sale agreement was signed. When they went back to the ZBA to get the project permitted, there had been a single family home development that went in next door, and all the homeowners were upset that this was going in their backyard, and they filed an appeal, and we litigated for 4 years.
They didn't know about the project before they started building the single family home?
I don't know that they didn't know. In fact, I'm based upon the timing, certainly the developer, had the developer done any due diligence, would have known about the affordable housing project. Whether the individual homeowners were notified or did do their due diligence to know that a project had been pre-permitted next door, I don't know, but that doesn't divest them of standing. They have standing with whether they knew about it or not, they can still appeal it. And they did, and they filed an appeal of the 40B comprehensive permit. They filed an appeal, or they filed a lawsuit challenging the legitimacy of the purchase and sale agreement. They filed They filed it in 4 separate lawsuits in 2 different courts, and we successfully defended. We won every motion we filed. We won every case. Took us 4 years to do it. 2 trips to the appeals court.
So that was after the 3 years of the permitting process?
Yeah, so I think when all was said,
So that 10 years, it's not.
it was, I mean, there was some overlap, but I forget the whole period start to finish, but it was like a 7-year period, 8-year period start to finish in terms of from the RFP issuing to the date of shovel in the ground.
A little more expensive after 7 years to build.
For sure. For sure. But a lot of it was because the problem with these 100% affordable projects is that the rule of thumb, and I'm no developer, but I've worked on plenty of 40B projects. Most developers will tell you that if they're building let's call it a for sale project, then 25% of the units are affordable. It generally costs them more to build an affordable unit than they can sell. So they're underwater on the affordables. And so they have to recoup that on the market rate, plus reap whatever benefit they're gonna reap from the project. They're not doing this for, for out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it to make some sort of profit. There's a profit limitation under 40B, but it's 20% of total development cost, so it's still a sizable profit. So nobody can build a 100% affordable project out of pocket because they'd be in the red on every project. So they need it subsidized, and it gets subsidized most often through the low income housing tax credit program, but that program is limited in terms of availability of funds. So it's sort of common knowledge that if you're a new applicant for that program, there's dozens of applicants ahead of you that have gone through 1, 2, 3 rounds that haven't been selected yet, and they're ahead of you in line. So unless your project is something that somehow is going to be streamlined because, you know, you're best friends with the governor or something like that, right? I mean, you're going to wait your turn. So that's part of the challenge too. And that was a cause, like I said, it took about 3 years start to finish. I think they were able to apply for under the program, even with the litigation pending. But no doubt, in addition to them being, you know, wherever they were in the queue, I can't imagine the DHCD looked at a project that was still in the midst of litigation and said, sure, let's fund that one. So.
100% affordable rentals? Or do they do 100% affordable for sales?
So it can be either.
It can be
It can be either. So there is and maybe this might be what you're thinking of. So there's with affordable housing projects, one thing that is of importance to municipalities, as I alluded to before, is that subsidized housing inventory and your attempts to hit your 10% mark. Once you hit your 10% mark, you're sort of in control of your own destiny. It doesn't mean you shouldn't create any more affordable housing in your community, but it means that you can you can rebuff any unfriendly 40Bs and attempts to put them where you might not want them. One way to get to your 10% faster is to permit more rental developments than for sale developments, because DHCD adopted this policy at this point, it's 15 years ago, and it's now incorporated into their official Chapter 40B guidelines, and it applies to any project that is developed under DHCD guidance for which units would qualify in the SHI. So that's 40B, 40R, the new 40Y, all of those fall under the same policy. If you build a project and you designate it a rental project and at least 25% of the units are affordable, you get to count every unit in the project, even the 75% that are market rate, as if they were affordable, even though it's a lie because they're not affordable. So it doesn't make any sense because they count on that side of the spreadsheet as being affordable units. They're not deed restricted, they're not affordable, but it was meant as an incentive for developers to build rental housing because developers were opting for many years for building ownership housing instead. So that policy still exists. So some communities have really gone to the extreme. You know, we did some private work many years ago, at this point, a dozen years ago, in the town of Bridgewater. Several 40Bs, small. This is back in the 40B heyday, pre-recession, when you could do a 4-unit or an 8-unit 40B, and it still made sense financially because the soft costs were not nearly what they are today. And we did a series of small 40Bs, generally friendly 40Bs, with the town in Bridgewater. And then 40R was adopted in 2011 or 2012, and Bridgewater said, we're going to take these 50 acres on our border, we're going to designate it a 40R smart growth overlay district. And then they approved like a 600-unit project rental on that site. And they hit they went from 4% to like 20% overnight, right? Because they permitted this 600-unit development, series of developments. So that is something, maybe not on that scale, but that is something that affordable housing trusts have done. They've been proactive in pursuing development opportunities, not necessarily developing projects themselves, but doing, you know, following the Ashland model, where you have control over property, you maybe even pre-permit the property, and then you attempt to find an entity that you can enter into an agreement with. And in Ashland's case, they signed a purchase sale agreement. So when they ultimately conveyed this property away to EA Fish and the Planning Office for Urban Development, they developed this housing. So the Affordable Housing Trust got what it wanted. It got affordable housing, but it also recouped the full value of the land as pre-permitted. So I forget the amount, it's public record at this point, but it's like $1 million for the property, partly because it had value to it, but also partly because they did all the pre-permitting on it. Really had no significant cost to them. They had to incur consultant costs, engineering costs, and stormwater report and things of that sort. But, you know, they were volunteers that were attending. They didn't have counsel representing them at the ZBA meetings. They did all the permitting themselves.
Lori has her hand up.
I don't know which chair I should say. Just as a point of information, maybe some of you on the trust do not know, but what Adam was just speaking about, we do have a project like that in Townsend. It's called Turnpike Village. And all of those are considered affordable units towards our count.
Yes.
And what is our count then? If those are
I think
considered.
it's less than 4% now because we lost some.
3.7.
DHCD's dirty little secret is that for 10 years, and I know Chas knows this because I feel like we've had this conversation before.
Yes, we have.
For 10 years, they will continue to add units to the subsidized housing inventory that are affordable units. So if you are at 5% today and you permit a project, let's call it a rental project, let's call it a 100-unit rental project, and therefore every unit counts as affordable, they will add the 100 units into the subsidized housing inventory. Then in 6 months, you permit another 100-unit project, and that project is ownership. 25 of those are affordable. They'll add those 25 units to the inventory, but they don't alter the baseline number. They don't update the baseline number by project or whatever other development might be occurring in your community that is not occurring under 40B or an inclusionary housing bylaw. They only do that at the census. So there's been a lot of discussion, believe it or not, even though it's now 2023, the 2020 census numbers are still not reflected in the subsidized housing inventory. There's been some murmurings that that's going to happen in May. So we're a month and a half away. But there's a lot of concern in communities. I represent, again, public information. I represent the town of Tingsboro. I represented them even before I was town council as special counsel to the Zoning Board of Appeals for 12 years. And I represented them in reviewing no fewer than 7 or 8 different 40B projects. They permitted 40B after 40B after 40B, and they hit their 10% finally. They're at like 11%. Now they're waiting for the census numbers to come in. They're not far over 10%. What happens when 10 years of baseline growth hits the subsidized housing inventory? They may go from 11% to 6%. So it is a little bit like chasing your tail.
It has been for 8 years at least that I've been in it. That's all we've been doing.
So I don't get it. You can fix that with a program. I mean, you can just, when they key in the new data, or do they only key in the data every 10 years? I mean, you have a census data, you know what the census is, you can figure out the percentages. This is like 8th grade math. And so you program it so that when you enter it, you get an updated number.
Yeah, so my understanding, and I have this from multiple sources, so if DHC is doing things differently, then I would stand corrected. But my understanding has been that they simply haven't updated the number between 2010 or 2012 or 13, whenever the 2010 census numbers were input. They just haven't updated. They're not doing a census every year. They do a census every 10 years.
No,
So the baseline growth in Townsend from 2010 to 2020 has never been captured because they're not adding on an annual basis the number of building permits that issue in the town of
And
Townsend.
they ask us, they send out surveys every year on what you're doing. And we send them, I know we've been doing it the past 3 years, and it's the first time that the housing authority has had visibility to this questionnaire that they send out for it, but nothing has been updated.
well, that is an enormous task if they're just entering the data and doing it once every 10 years. I mean, why wouldn't you just be entering it all along? And I mean, it's an easy, you can write a program.
Well, you can. You would need staff to request information from each of the 351 cities and towns as to what they're. So I've seen those forms, and I certainly know that municipalities are reporting on an annual basis the number of affordable units in affordable projects that they're permitting in their communities. I don't know that it's being reported to DHCD what your baseline growth is.
No.
How your census numbers change in your community based upon the number of dwelling units.
They ask for the development, they ask for the amount of permits, they ask for the basic information.
Okay.
So that's always been my understanding, because everybody's been
Okay.
holding their breath waiting for the census numbers
Every
to hit.
10 years. Okay.
And they've been holding their breath for 2 years.
And they don't get reported until 2-3 years afterwards. like 2020 you would assume that they would come out with the new numbers, but we didn't see the new numbers, I think, until late last year.
So what's the 3.7% to get to 10%? What's that 3.7% based on? 10 years ago?
No, it's based on our current,
It's now.
what we have now, yes. What we reported this year, they update their website with what we reported according to what I'm being told.
And they're using the old baseline census number is what you're saying, okay?
Right.
So they're using the number of dwelling units you had in the community in 2010 versus, and they're holding that against as part of the equation, the number of affordable units you have in 2023.
Correct.
But the baseline growth has gone up. So when that catches up, the percentage is going to presumably go down. They've also not been great about updating the SHI. I can remember, again, pre-recession, 40B's heyday, although it's started to come back. There was a lot of, they were updating the subsidized housing inventory every 3 months. Since then, it's been like every 3 years they update the SHI. So,
But Ronnie, it doesn't change the mission, trying to get as many affordable units as we can,
That's right, yeah.
you know, with whatever is existing inventory or whatever land is available, we're gonna chase that anyway.
the SHI has not yet been updated to reflect the 2020 census figures. The 2020 census redistricting data summary file that has been released by the U.S. Census Bureau does not include data on vacant, seasonal, occasional, or recreational units used by DHC to determine census year-round housing units for the SHI. The SHI will therefore continue to reflect the 2010 census year-round housing unit figures until such data is released. As of April 27th, 2022, that's almost a year ago. The Census Bureau has provided a release schedule for future data sets that will include this data in May of 2023.
Right.
It's on their website currently.
Now, when we were putting together the housing production plan, this was a major factor in some of the numbers that we were putting together because we wanted to be as accurate as we possibly could, but could only be as accurate as what the numbers that we were being fed by DHCD. So I don't think we may probably go into our next housing production plan with actually better numbers now that we have the trust being able to give us their part of the pie to put the housing production plan together. We had it, we just put it together, what, a year and a half ago?
Yeah, well, it was approved last year around this time, right? Like
Right.
officially.
So we had been putting it together like
Yeah,
a year previous to it. But we didn't have the affordable housing trust in place in order to do that. So now that we have both of them together with your coming up with your 3-year, 5-year mission, however you guys want to do that, and then where the housing authority is right now, I think we can have much better numbers, much better prospects for what we want to do.
No, I thought we updated the housing, I thought Goldstein went and got the 2020 census numbers
Yes.
and updated it, so
Yes.
our housing production plan should have
The more
a
accurate
more
numbers,
accurate number, yeah.
but is different than what DHCD
Yeah, and that was
is reporting.
Right.
Yeah, so DHCD's current subsidized housing inventory, the latest update was on December 21st of 2020.
Yeah.
So that's 2.5 years ago, two years and 4 months ago. According to that data, and they have 4 columns: 2010 census, total number of housing units, total development units, meaning total development units, and then SHI units, and then the percentage. So you were at 4.3%, comparing the SHI units to the total number of units per the 2010 census. As of December 21st of 2020, that number may even be different now.
It is.
So I would
Yeah.
think it's the 3.7, right?
Yes, because we had several units drop off and went to public sale. So that we need a process involved, and that's another reason why we wanted to put the trust together, was to be able to preserve those so they wouldn't fall off. Because we had no vehicle to preserve any. I'd like to go back to a little history, if that's okay with you guys. 8 years ago, when I came onto the housing authority, our main mission was to increase affordable housing in the town of Townsend. And we knew that the town owned the land over on Dudley Road and other parcels. But the housing authority itself could not really do anything about it. I mean, we needed a vehicle to be able to, anytime that the housing authority wanted to do it, we had to bring it to the town, do a town vote, And we had to do it in stages in order to be able to get it to a point where we could actually do something or hire somebody to be able to do it. We decided, the housing authority decided that the best way to do this, and actually Adam and I had many discussions in regards to this, is creating a affordable trust to be able to control those assets so that we would be able to actually go forward with what needs to be done with town properties, you know, and it was pretty kind of generic back then. It was like, we need another agency to be able to do this. There were many hurdles that we had to go through to be able to get this affordable housing trust in place. And then once we had it in place, it was like, we didn't, you know, there wasn't funding. There was a lot of things that needed to be done, but we had to put it together without the assistance of important people in the town. I guess I'll leave it at that. So our hope was to be able to continue on with our function as the housing trust, but we also had to keep up with our standards, like keeping the housing production plan current and voted on by DHCD, keeping all these pieces together, while we can see how we can do to keep the trust there and the housing authority together. Now that we have both pieces together, I'm actually more excited about hearing what you're supposed to do or what you're doing, because that's what we've been looking for a long time. What I would like to be able to do is that we work a little more collaboratively, because we've been trying to develop Dudley Road for 8 years. We've had 4 different proposals. We've brought 2 of those proposals in front of the town, and both got shot down. And I will say I went there without any armor both of those times that I did. It was quite interesting. But now I think with knowing that we have other parcels of land, putting them into the trust, now I think we have the support, and between the 2 boards, I think we could really make a difference on what we need to
So
do.
when you say you put them to the town and you were not successful, the town being what, the select board, who did you
Town
present them to?
Town meetings.
Town meeting, okay,
In the town meetings is where we would get shot down.
yeah,
And
of course.
yeah, and this is why the parcels of land that were finally transferred over to the Affordable Trust were parcels that we have been trying to develop for 8 years, just so you know. So our frustration has been doing the task of what the THA was and having to jump through hoops through the administration, I guess, was allowing or not allowing us to do to be able to do it. So at this point, we had to have, or just before, actually concurrently, we had the housing production plan that was due, that we had to get it done. So we worked on getting the trust set up and getting the housing production plan done and approved, which we did. Now, the next step is for us to be able to, you guys establish what you've been doing, and it's exactly what needs to be done. And I'm very excited to finally see this moving forward. And the housing authority then would be able to start doing the things that we need to do, because we need to start discussing what your plans are to do that. And if we need to manage something, we need to start making some plans on our end of it to make sure that we're managing properties that you guys are wanting to develop and do whatever you need to do. And also just understand that we also have the DHCD that we have to work with. So there's a lot of red tape on our end. So whatever we decide for us, we need time to be able to work with them to be able to do it. And if we need to pull an outside entity to help us with the management portion of it, we're going to be able to do that too.
You're talking about managing the property.
Yes.
One thing.
Yes. Because the 2 properties that we have that the housing authority had built, and that's Townsend Woods and Atwood Acres. All right. We don't have anything. We, the town, make no money off of those. Those technically were signed over to the entities that are running them right now. And we have gotten nothing. We can't even get some of our townspeople in those facilities because we have no control over them.
But I thought that was part of the agreement, like 10 years out after those were developed, that they would, or was this something that happened after the fact?
What do you mean?
The fact that RCAP or whoever is managing them.
We signed it over, lock, stock, and barrel to them right in the beginning.
In the beginning, because I remember Atwood Acres was I thought, run through the housing authority in Townsend early on.
Never was,
Not at all.
never was. It was run through a separate corporation called Townsend Senior Housing. And they're actually looking for people on those boards. Those are separate boards. They're,
Not associated with RCAP? Okay, I'm confused.
Excuse me.
go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, so Townsend Woods and Atwood Acres do have separate boards of directors. They are run by RCAP. Now, many years ago, in fact, if you remember Judy Consemi, okay, so back then, that's a long time ago, all right? So back then, she was our state rep and had to step down because she was going to go work for RCAP, but it was called something different then. They changed their name in the interim. RCAP doesn't go back to the beginning of Atwood Acres, but it's an entity that's hired by HUD. And because these two buildings were built with HUD funds, 203 HUD funds, they controlled we owned the land, but that was our contribution to the project. HUD pays for the rest, and plus some sweat equity from some other people here in town. And RCAP runs it. It wasn't until, and I was on the board for both of them at one time. And at that time, there were some people in town that were allowed, it seemed, got preference to live there. I know it happened with Townsend Woods. And in the interim, what we didn't understand as the board or us as the housing authority was that we would receive complaints from residents there and bring that to the board, and they would say, we don't have any say. The town has no say. That was an eye-opener for me, who had already served on the board for years.
So let me ask, so there is the board that has no association at all with RCAP, no influence, so why is there a board?
I think that's the way.
Just as a rubber stamp. I can tell you from experience, just as a rubber stamp. So it became very disheartening. And the housing authority at that time decided that, well, first of all, there is no more 203 HUD money, but that we would never do something like that again. And that was another reason for the trust, so that the trust could get properties, so that we could decide who was going to manage it, whether we went into by we, I mean the town, whether we go into a regional type of thing, or which I did speak to Pepperell and found out that she would not be able to do that with us because they are HUD funded. They're a HUD assistance program.
Then
So
I think if what you're saying is that the town is going to fund this on its own. We need to find a way to fund the trust, because right now that's not a possibility to build something that we manage on our own. It's not.
right.
I don't think money is there for that.
Right.
So I think we have to either get this trust funded sustainably, which could be through bylaws. If we're looking at new bylaws, we could require, I believe, a certain amount of money to be with permits. I heard this in a meeting, the secret meeting, last week, that's one way to fund. We can talk about that, or CPA. There has to be a way to fund it. Otherwise, doing that, we're looking at 25 years down the road till there's enough money in the trust
So
to
if
do
you,
something that we don't have to have someone else manage.
yes, so if you had looked at our housing production plan, part of the goal of the housing authority is to assist the trust to find ways to fund the trust. And that's kind of like our sweat equity to you guys to say, we need to come together and figure out how we're going to do that. CPA is a big one.
which is, goes next week
Right.
for the
Yeah, on the
BOS.
28th, we're gonna talk about that.
So you have the ability through an inclusionary housing bylaw to require payments in lieu, and some communities do this. So the traditional inclusionary housing bylaw requires a certain percentage, 10% tends to be the norm. It's often less than the 25% that would be required under 40B and similar programs. 10% of the units in any project over a certain size, often it's something like 4 or 6 units, to provide 10% affordable housing, or to make a payment in lieu, which monies could go into an affordable housing trust fund. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. But generally speaking, the Attorney General's office has been supportive of and has approved these sorts of bylaws. Often for larger developments, developers wouldn't choose to make the payments in lieu. If they're developing with an economy of scale, they'll probably just develop and offer the affordable units. But with smaller developments, with 4-unit, 6-unit, 8-unit, even 12-unit developments, it may be too costly. 10% of a 4-unit development is 4/10 of a unit. Well, you got to round that up to 1 unit. So now it's effectively 25%, and that's a big hit to a developer of only 4 units. So it's a lot better for them to do the math per an equation, and if the equation is right, it's going to be less expensive for them to write a check than to dedicate one of their 4 units as affordable. So that's one small check the town gets, and do that 10 times over in the course of a year. Do that 40 times over in the course of 4 years. You're building up a balance in your account.
So I'm also thinking of the properties that the town has that's been sitting in town properties and nothing's been done with them, to be able to get those into the trust so that whatever happens with those particular, whether it's a sale, whether it wants to be developed or whatever, that those funds that come in will stay within the trust, so that would also increase as well. Now, there's several parcels of land that we have that we can talk with the town properties, and again, that would have to go to town vote at that point, but all it is it's going to the Affordable Housing Trust, and then the trust themselves would make a decision on what they want to do with it, whether they want to sell it, develop it, or whatever. That way, that's going to increase, the money's going into the trust. So those are a lot of options that I think we should be looking at all.
I want to back up to the inclusionary bylaw. Is that a 2/3 or a majority vote? That has to be approved at town meeting, correct?
It does. So I don't think there's anything in the recent legislation that reduces that quantum of vote. I would have to look to see how it's structured, but I think it's still 2/3.
So you really need to have a town that is behind developing affordable housing. If you don't have that, then it will never pass, because we did in 1988 or so, we did propose that with the open space, the OSPD bylaw that we have and the multifamily one. And it was shut down. That piece was removed from the zoning. That was that first master plan committee way back when. And it didn't pass because there wasn't support for that then. I don't know. I mean, what's your sense? Is there support for affordable housing in the community?
Yes, and here's how I think we need to start approaching this, right? If we look at who is recipients of affordable housing, I think people would be very astounded to see what demographic actually has affordable housing. It is police officers, it is fire people, it is teachers, it's workforce housing. And it's elderly as well. If we look at when we were putting together the housing production plan, we looked at the 10-year and 15 and 20-year forecasts for towns, and our average age is going up and up and up and up. So to be able to preserve some of the individuals that are here in town, they're going to be needing affordable housing, selling whatever the property that they have and hopefully getting something that's affordable, whether it be ownership or whatever, so that they stay in town.
So I agree that the data shows that it makes sense. I am not convinced that the people that show up at town meeting are going to vote for it.
Correct, so this is.
So that's
We would
the,
have to start marketing it that way.
One,
That's-
one of the most, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, most of you probably don't know, that one of the greatest challenges with affordable housing is addressing misconceptions as to what affordable housing is, right?
Yeah.
At least New Hampshire, you would have to call it workforce housing in their law. We call it affordable housing and we lump it all together as affordable housing. So people hear affordable housing, and this is not to speak ill of anybody, but they think Section 8 housing. And, you know, that's not really a justification for why they don't like it. It shouldn't be. I mean, the Section 8 housing vouchers, those people need housing too. Having said that, what the Commonwealth typically refers to affordable housing was really low to moderate income housing, this 70 to 80% area median income standard. It is your police officers, your firefighters, your school teachers. I've assisted communities in conveying these units.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at some of these numbers, and family of 3, family of 4, you know, the 70 to 80% is at $90,000 a year. I mean,
We
this
were
is
doing
not-
research, they had a town that actually had a building, I think it was an old school or something, that municipal employees had first dibs on the apartments that were in there.
I just think it's a tough sell in this town because people will say, well, they should be able to make their money. They shouldn't have to. So on the one hand, you shouldn't have to subject developers to paying these fees. On the other hand, you'll hear, oh, but we need affordable housing. You can't rent anything. And so where does that come together? So, you know, there's a lot of lip service to affordable housing, but there isn't a lot of coming out and voting for measures that would support development.
We've been doing it for 8 years, so I could tell you stories.
Everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think it's
Okay.
how we market it and how we move forward with it.
we need a marketing rep.
So this isn't going to address an inclusionary housing bylaw issue with respect to getting the necessary support, but it's something I wanted to make reference to today. I get the map up in front of me. So MBTA community zoning. So I don't know how much that's been discussed so far in Townsend.
Well, we have is it a DLTA grant to look at that
Okay.
for us?
So you're on the clock. All communities are on the clock. I don't know your minimum number, but I can search for it right here.
We have 2 years and I want to say 210.
You have until the end of 2024, no question. I presume you filed. In fact, I know you did because
We
there's
did.
only 4 communities that didn't.
Maybe it's.
One of which I
300
represent.
unit.
So
Didn't we have the MBTA community stuff on the housing production plan as well, right? Didn't we address it there? So it's on our radar.
178.
Had dropped, right?
Yeah.
They've updated
I
it.
know
It was
they
higher.
dropped
They
it.
dropped it.
Yeah.
They dropped it. So it's 178. You qualify as an adjacent small town, so that puts you in the most flexible of the categories in terms of where you can place this. You can effectively place it anywhere in your community. So something to consider, and I'm not a planner by any means, is the way that can work in conjunction with what you're trying to do on some of your municipally owned property.
Yeah,
Potentially rezoning some of that municipally owned property and helping you sell that to town meeting by stating we have an obligation to do this, and why not do it on property that we control, right?
And that was discussed with our previous land use coordinator as well,
right.
because we earmarked a couple of parcels that would qualify for what Adam's talking about.
But not the ones none of the parcels that were earmarked were ones that the trust has, because my understanding is that it's not just that there are other concerns about where those properties are in the zoning for MBTA communities.
So it's very fluid. They're kind of making the rules up as they go.
Exactly.
I say in a public meeting. It's we know minimum density is 15 units per acre. We know that. We know there can't be age restrictions. We know it has to be housing that's suitable for families. We know that in a community that qualifies as an adjacent small town, like Townsend does, it can go anywhere in the community. It doesn't have to be a certain distance from a transit station.
Okay, so that has changed.
Yes, so you have the flexibility there to place it where you want it.
Okay.
They exempted adjacent small communities. If you qualify under any of the other three categories, you're required to place it in certain locations. But you wouldn't be in Townsend. So you have some flexibility there, but
Okay.
And
So
we
then
just
we
need a
can-
plan.
Well,
Right? That's all we
do have
need
a
is-
property timeline here for all the properties. We've been working on it. We'll review it again on Monday, but the first one we were gonna look at was South Road Road to redo that plan. We weren't gonna look at Dudley Road until 2027. That's investigative development at that point with an RFP for development or sale in 2028. Maybe we move that up based on MBTA community. So,
and to clarify, it's the end of 2025.
it's the end of 2025.
24 for the other communities, but you're an adjacent small town,
And
so you
that-
have the latest deadline.
When you say end of, you mean
December
December.
31st is the deadline.
End of 2025. And that's the deadline for saying what we're gonna do.
That's the deadline for having taken action to adopt the zone.
Okay.
Now, what happens if that doesn't occur? We don't know. So the way that they structured it is they created an interim deadline for compliance. That deadline passed. That was January 31st of 2023, by which you had to file your action plan.
And we did do that.
You did. Like I said, only 4 MBTA communities didn't do that. Now they're focused on the 3 deadlines. If you're a rapid transit community, essentially you're served by the subway, then the end of 23 is your deadline. So you're already on the clock. If you're a commuter rail community or an immediately adjacent larger community, it's the end of 24. If you're an immediately adjacent smaller community, it's the end of 25 to take action through town meeting. Now, if you go to town meeting and you make 3 attempts, 1 attempt, 5 attempts, town meeting won't adopt the zoning. It's anybody's guess what happens. I don't know. I've spoken to the Attorney General's office. Attorney General's office doesn't know. I'm not sure anybody really knows. It's too far out, but
Okay. All right. So, all right, so this timeline, we updated it once, I haven't, at our last meeting, we talked about it, and I haven't updated this yet, but I'll have it Monday. But basically it's, South Row Road. It's the first one,
Did you get the plans, the 2008 plans for that?
yes.
Okay.
I'm the one that sent it to Joe.
Yeah, I asked Jody for it because I hadn't seen it before.
Yeah, and I sent it to
Did you
Joe.
get it?
Yeah, I hadn't seen it before that.
Yeah, so, and then the, Haynes Road 1, which is the bigger parcel, survey it to cut off a section for sale to Mass Fish and Wildlife, because they want the section that is biomap 2.
Yeah, yeah.
And adjacent to the, wildlife management area.
and is the hope that they're going to pay something for that?
Oh, they will pay for it.
They will, and that's where we need to make sure that that money goes into the trust.
Right.
And,
Into the town's general.
we
But
want to.
that property is one of the trust current properties. That's our,
Yes.
the care
Yes.
testing control.
And it has an entrance on Wallace Hill and it has an entrance on
Yeah, I
Hayes.
remember that.
So we were gonna give them so that they have frontage. If you have frontage, you get paid more.
Right,
So
so
when-
you retain the other front.
When we survey it, we're gonna,
Split the frontages.
give one side to them, with frontage probably off of Haynes, and then we will access off of Wallace Hill. Is the way we think we're doing it.
I will need to step away.
I know.
For that.
Yeah, yes.
But I think we had talked about involving, and of course this comes at a cost for the benefit of recouping some cost, being sure you've engineered it so that you're certain before you give away one access and one frontage that you can utilize the other frontage for your intended purposes.
Yeah, yeah. So there's that, and then, we hope to develop South Row Road first, so FY 2025 would be an RFP for South Row Road. And, plan of the wetland delineation, et cetera, and a plan for the Haynes Road properties, whatever we're gonna do with that.
Right.
And then that development, RFP is 2026 and develop in 2027. The 2 Blood Road properties, that's investigate, development, or sale. Because those are the ones I don't understand why the town owns them really. Those are properties with enough frontage and enough acreage and no constraints.
Yep.
No wetland constraints. So if we're gonna sell, to try to, build the coffers.
Yeah.
So we have that for FY 26, figuring out whether we're gonna develop that or sell it. So that will give us the boost, because FY 24 and FY 25, we have ARPA funds to play with.
Right, so that's a good plan.
And so the boost of funds would come in there. And then Dudley Road is far out, but it might make sense for MBTA communities, especially given the fact that it's behind 100 acres.
Well,
So-
and that's another reason why I think we should talk, because we have had many different conversations about different options. We could throw out the options to you guys of what we've been looking at so that you have a good idea.
Yeah,
Pocket neighborhoods, multi-use. I mean, there's a lot of different things that we've looked at before we went in front of the town again.
yeah. So that's one that's out a little bit. So that's how we're generally what we've been talking about and planning. Nothing is set in stone by any means, nor will it be even after we write it down. But if we don't write something down, we'll never do anything.
And the last approach on that parcel, that was one where we had attempted to pitch it as veterans housing, is that
Yeah.
correct? That was the last attempt, and that went in place.
So
Veterans and multi-use, because we were looking at doing what did we call it? A transition housing, so that individuals that wanted to get into the senior housing and they were 2 years on the wait list or whatever, they would be able to go into the transitional housing before they went in there, so that we as a town could be able to at least preserve them in the town so they didn't have to seek elsewhere.
Right.
I do, if you don't mind, as far as the board is concerned, the makeup of the board, I wanted to put out to everybody in this particular meeting is that, there was some concern that when Veronica stepped down, she is the selectman liaison for that. I wasn't sure exactly how that made up. If the current or the next board of selectmen is selecting somebody, I'm going to throw my ring in the hat to be the selectman representative for the Affordable Housing Trust. And I did check with the Ethics Commission, and they do have a written opinion to say that, yes, I am able to do that. And just throwing that out to you guys, because this is something that I think is really important for towns, and you guys are doing a lot of good work, and I just want to make sure that continues.
So where are we at? Should we? I'm just looking at this because it's 7:30. There's a string quartet at the library, and I'm supposed to meet my husband there. So just know that. So
So I think next steps for the Affordable Housing Trust is, of course, to get your bylaw in effect. So you'll get the draft of that, you can approve it, we'll get that on a town meeting warrant, so
okay,
that'll be done.
The bylaw, that we talked about, the two different amendments.
So the
no,
amendments actually don't require town meeting action,
Oh, good.
because town meeting simply authorized the recording of a trust and didn't specify the language. They just authorized the trust.
Okay.
So you can amend that trust with the vote of the trustees.
which is
So
why
that's
we
easy.
did what we did
Yeah.
at the left, and
Okay.
Adam wrote up the
Yeah.
certificate. Right.
Right.
We're gonna be notarized on Monday. Eric knows he'll be there with his notary stamp.
Sure.
So we're signing the certificate of amendment that Adam put together. And Sabrina has the
Resignations.
the resignations and the the appointments.
Mhm.
And she has the one for the Board of Selectmen vote.
Yeah.
Because we had to do both votes that we did last time.
Yeah.
So
And that
that'll
all
be
has to
already.
recorded?
So all that needs to be recorded. That's simple enough. But what also happened is when town meeting voted to authorize the creation of the trust and the declaring of the recording of the declaration that brings the trust into existence, it didn't approve a bylaw. And we had this conversation at the time and a bylaw just wasn't done. So you need a bylaw that goes hand in hand that authorizes what, so I prepared a bylaw. It's almost like a reworking of the declaration. Portions of it are verbatim, but we prepared that and we'll get it on the warrant for the annual town meeting.
You guys are gonna speak to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're gonna
Yeah,
review
we
it at their
will.
meeting next
We're
week.
No, no, I'm
reviewing
saying
it
in the
on
town meeting,
Oh.
you're gonna
At the
speak to
town
it.
meeting, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be able to speak.
It should be a simple conversation.
Sell it. Figure out how to
I
sell it.
mean,
Adam, don't say it should be a simple conversation.
but well, I think, I mean,
So,
that's what I mean is I think it's how you pitch it. If you pitch it as we're gonna have this substantive discussion about something that doesn't exist yet, does anybody have any ideas? Good luck. If you pitch it as town meeting already voted, this trust already exists, the declaration's on record. This is just housekeeping. We gotta have a bylaw on file.
and
Yeah.
so that it's in
And that's-
E-code,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
all it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So that you can look it up easily
Correct.
without going to the registry and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the next step.
So we will take care of that. We're continuing to work with, this is the next thing on the agenda, the draft 5-year plan. Karen gave us the draft that she has with her track changes. So we will each look at that and she's coming to our meeting on Monday as well. And, we'll just go over all the things and I'll give her the timeline and the budget. These were addendums that she wanted from us. So I have we have a 5-year budget that we reviewed. You can see our changes there to what I had written. I just haven't typed it in good, but I'll have it for Monday. And so we'll give her that. And we should have a 5-year plan to put out at Earth Day on April 20th. I figure we have a Board of Selectmen table for energy aggregation. We'll have all this stuff there too, so that they can see that. Might want to put out the housing production, maybe.
We have a table slot for housing, the housing authority. We can get together. We can definitely put together housing production plans.
So we could put that out in the 5-year plan that we have, assuming it's ready, to start getting community buy-in. For
Yep,
these things.
We could do that.
So,
and then you can,
me, work on housing. We're ready for this.
and then you can discuss internally what your thoughts are about other ways to fund the trust, including the route of kind of a bylaw that would, require a payment in lieu, some form of inclusionary housing. So
I know Eric wants to have a bylaw review in the next year or so.
Yep.
And so, I would like to see that. That's the place to look at that, I think.
We've been working on some bylaw stuff
As
ourselves.
opposed to piecemeal stuff, just do it all at once and. Because there is in the charter, we're supposed to have a bylaw review every 5 years.
Yep.
And one of the 3 and 8 years ending in 3 and 8, there's supposed to be a bylaw review of all the bylaws in town. And so Eric was planning to act on it.
I don't remember seeing any bylaw review.
It's in there. It is. in
Oh,
there.
no, I'm saying
Oh, no.
actually doing it.
No,
I've been
You're
through
right.
many years of 3 and 8 and I don't remember a bylaw review.
so anyway, so there's that. Yeah, so we should be able to put together a table for April 22nd.
Okay.
That has if we vote our CPA acceptance or whatever.
Yeah.
On Tuesday, if we're gonna put that on, get information on that, although I thought Eric was gonna have to come talk to us. From that CPA website.
I thought he was putting together something for us to talk about on Tuesday.
Oh, maybe he is still, I don't know.
Yep.
So, it's on the agenda. I mean,
Put that together.
yes, you did. So anyway, that's where we stand. I think, going down to 5, next meeting, I think we should have joint meetings every few months.
I agree. Yeah, I do. I don't know. what to
Not
do.
every month by any means.
Yeah, we're meeting every month only because we got our special projects that we're doing, but we've been
A
doing.
quarterly meeting would be nice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we have tried, to do those and it hasn't really worked out. So, I think if we can get them on books like early enough. I mean,
Yeah, like
do it
maybe plan
quarterly
for
and do it.
June.
Yeah.
If we do our, starting in June. That way,
June would be good. That'll give us some direction, knowing where we're going with CPA, know where.
have our draft, our 5-year plan no longer draft. Maybe have a meeting to roll that out.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, so why don't we look at June and we can talk about it at our next meeting and
Yeah.
throw some dates at you guys and see if you can make it.
So, I have a question for Adam before we're done. On this Venn diagram, the things that we had put down below for TAHT responsibilities, I added preserve affordability of units in Townsend, because that should be on both sides. Down payment, assistance, etc., is trust. And then I have, oh, that's just preserve affordability. I used an arrow and I wrote it. So those are the only two things that I have to add under TAHT responsibility.
Right, I mean, I think you could probably even further expand upon that with the caveat that they're not necessarily responsibilities, they're maybe authorities that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has, right? So the Affordable Housing Trust isn't obligated to preserve affordability. It's not obligated to create new housing. These are authorizations. These are things that it can do, that many affordable housing trusts do. And again, you can look at the examples here, just going community by community of what other communities have done, from small scale homeownership programs to first time homebuyer programs to grant programs for developers. Sudbury partnered with the Habitat for Humanity on tax title land purchased at auction by the trust. So there are all sorts of outside the box type things that you can do based on what has been acceptable in other communities. I don't think you have to reinvent the wheel here, but you've also listed plenty of things that you've got on your list based upon what fits you here in Townsend. So
let me ask one question, because this is the property on Warren Road, far out Warren Road, that Town Properties said they wanted the Board of Selectmen to put it up for sale. And what we decided is to talk to Habitat for Humanity. There's an existing house on it that's in pretty run down, to cut that off. And we've already talked about to Fish and Wildlife about selling the back part to them, and they are definitely interested because it abuts Hickory Hills. So this is outside the trust. This has nothing to do with the trust or even the housing authority. So who works with Habitat for Humanity? How does that work? Is that something that the trust should be talking about, or the Board of Selectmen, or the Housing Authority?
Yes, and yes. I think we all
But
should.
someone has to do it, and we need to put a finger on someone so that it actually gets done,
who owns the property?
the town. So it's a
Through the
selectman.
selectmen.
Yes. So the selectmen, then, we could get a survey done to survey out the front 3 acres.
Yep.
And, what Fish and Wildlife said is, as long as we go to the planning board and say, here we have this A&R lot, and then they get the remaining. They don't have to have the whole thing surveyed. They just get the remaining section of the land. And that is okay for their issue, is what Eric and I were told. So it's the selectmen then that need to authorize the survey and get that rolling.
Yes, the selectmen
Okay.
actually can talk with Habitat for Humanity
And see if
To-
they're interested.
we would need to put it on their list of possible properties.
Okay.
And then they would come back to the selectmen and say, we would be interested in it, and then we would take the next step.
Okay. So
Just
that's the selectmen.
Right, selectmen, and just be mindful of procurement requirements.
Yeah, there would have to be like
There wouldn't. I think there's an exemption. I was looking here to see what they said here, and they actually have a footnote here in the guide that says, when it talks about the Sudbury Affordable Housing Trust partnering with Habitat, it says refer to intergovernmental real property transaction provisions under Chapter 30B, which is the Uniform Procurement. So I think that Habitat may qualify as a quasi-governmental agency, so such that it may be considered an intergovernmental transfer that would not require you to fully go out to bid. I have to confirm that.
Okay,
Otherwise, if you were to go back to my Ashland example, if you were just to put it out there and try to find a developer, you'd need to go through the 30B process, and you could structure your RFP so that you get the kind of developers you want. If you put it out there and say it needs to be 100% affordable, you're
no,
only.
it's only 3 acres.
It's 80-90.
And it doesn't have the required frontage.
Yeah.
So it would be kind of grandfathered, kind of. I mean, I don't know how we're gonna do that,
Well, 40B, you could do it 40B.
40B, but it would have to be built on the existing foundation or not, if it's 40B.
40B, you can waive the frontage requirement. You can waive all the zoning requirements.
So we could do friendly 40B.
It'd be a friendly 40B, a LIP under the LIP program. But again, you need to, if it's not Habitat, you need to go out to bid to find an entity to do it.
That's an option.
That is an option. So, okay, all right, so more talking on that agenda item, Chaz, for the next Board of Selectmen meeting. So, all right. Anybody else have anything else on the trust? So we'll plan for next meeting. We have ours on March 27th, but we're looking at June for a joint meeting.
Yes.
Okay, and then we'll just keep that rolling.
Adam, thank you very much for your time.
No, happy to do
Yeah,
it.
this was great, and thank you. Any questions? Do you guys have any more questions?
Anyone else from Sudbury?
I'm good.
Maybe
Lori
Lori?
dropped off.
Lori?
Yeah, Lloyd's been on for a little while.
They have the library.
She's in Las Vegas.
Okay, not at the library.
We should have been with Adam.
Okay, then.
Well, thanks for all the input, Anne.
I know,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Sure we'll need that.
Madam Chair, I'm going to adjourn the Housing Authority meeting at 7:24.
I second.
Roll call vote. And do I have a motion?
Have a call,
to
yeah.
adjourn?
Got Sexton Uranian yet?
Second.
I second it.
Oh, you
Oh,
seconded?
did
it?
Beverly?
We second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
And we are adjourned at 7:22. All right, thank you very much, everybody.